Well, welcome to the Pastors Podcast, the final installation of the Cornerstone History. This is Cornerstone History, Volume 9. And to celebrate, Jim, it's been quite a development. You are quite the storyteller.
Yes, and most of it's true, by the way.
At least half.
At least half. Yeah.
So
maybe not quite half.
We've got for this final volume of Cornerstone History, we've got a special setup here because we have 4 mics, but there are 7 people in the room that are going to contribute to this. We've got Pastor Reggie, Pastor Jim, Pastor Brian, Pastor Matt, Pastor Ara, Pastor José, all here to recount. Matt's taking a picture. For the pause here is that everybody's smiling for the ussy, and
video too.
That's right. And so we are going to recount essentially the first 10 years of the life of Cornerstone. So after First Baptist and Shoreline merged, we told the story of that. We're now going to recount the first 10 years. Now we're going to stop 10 years in because about 10 years in was about the mark of the pandemic. And I think at this point, the pandemic and whatever's happened since then is a little bit too close to try to retell the history. We need somebody else to tell that story, or we'll tell that story further down the road. There's lots of thoughts on that, but I want to kind of think about this moment in time, this essentially decade between the merge and the pandemic, and get some reflections, some insights from this now what's become pastoral team here. And we're not all here, not all the pastors are here, but pastoral team that's been a huge part of the development of that over the last decade. And so I'm just going to open it up, you guys. And I'm also going to assume that everybody's voices are different enough that you don't need to introduce yourself every time you talk. This is Brian. This is Ara. I think our voices are different.
Ara will be the tricky one.
But I just want to start out by opening this up as you think about the first decade of Cornerstone, from 2011 to 2020, let's say. What stands out to you? Jim, can we start with you? What stands out to you about that time period in the history of the church, standing on the shoulders of the entire story we've told over the last few months?
Well, I think from my perspective, we came into this out of a battle at the, what do I refer to it? The old congregation, the previous congregation, the congregation that was here in the building as we were beginning the merge. And the beginning of that, I think, was for me almost an emptying out. A lot of people, there had been so much drama, and people were so dubious about what was going to happen that people began to leave. And I think that scared me. The first thing, my first response was fear. I think that we're going to be an empty building. But what happened was, I think, marvelous and miraculous. For one thing, the generation that was here had very few young children. But what happened at the merge was that our children's rooms filled up. And it was marvelous to behold, if you will. It was just great to see all those rooms packed with kids and in use again. And of course, the congregation became a lot younger, the people who were here at that point. And a lot of the stuff that had been kind of locked in by a generation that had been here literally for decades, as they left, loosened up and opened up. And I think we saw this wonderful regeneration of the church. And that to me just was I was thrilled beyond what I can tell you. It was just wonderful to see. So that's the short answer.
That's sweet.
So I remember when that happened, and Nicole and I just being here, and just the word that comes to mind for me is just excitement. Is that, sort of like Jim said, just like we have no idea what's going down. People are writing very harshly worded letters, and being very upset, and people are leaving, and all of this. But I remember just other younger families like us and the Nixes and others who were just like, I don't know, it really feels like God is doing something, and it's kind of cool. Like I'm excited for what's going to happen, and just seeing it unfold. I remember just those first few months, first year or so. It was exciting. I think is a big word that comes to mind for me.
That's so cool. I mean, so as we kind of progressed past that, I didn't even think like the excitement. There was the first months, there was the first year, and then within a year or two, we were just a church, right? Like we were just a church being church together. As you think about the development of those years, Brian, like kind of beyond the initial excitement into the development of the church of Cornerstone as church and the things that stood out to you, what are some of the memories that kind of call back to you?
I mean, when I think about the first 10 years here, I think a lot about, honestly, the amount of people that we loved and have since moved. like thinking in a decade, you just realize how transient West LA is, because there are people who were here for we're such a significant part of the church, and almost all of them moved for very good reasons. It wasn't necessarily like bad reasons, but like you just realize how much the excitement that Reggie and Jim are talking about was fueled by God bringing particular people here for a short season inside of those 10 years to grow and to lead. And then some of them, stayed. Some of them didn't leave. And so for me, one of the big things that stands out are the people who didn't, and to watch God use them. I mean, some of them are on the table. Like, Reg, it was funny. Kevin Elwell in the last bonus episode was talking about you and Zach. And I was like, oh, they're both pastors now. Like, that's kind of cool. Because he was just talking about you as church members that he happened to care about, particularly, and just having discussions during tough times. And then here's José, who was here, and Ara, who came along, and to watch the church develop based on who God brought here, not just for a season, but to stay over those 10 years and beyond. And that to me we talked about it a bit before we started recording, but to me, one of the most notable things is that we went from a church that spoke English to a church that speaks 3 languages. And that happened in large part because of God bringing people to the church, not just that needed to serve, but who could serve, like, Reggie, José, Ara.
Yeah. So I want to talk about that in a little bit more depth, because I think it is one of more significant developments over that decade. But maybe before we get there, I mean, José, just as a church member at the time of the merge and seeing the development over the last 10 years, I mean, what stands out to you about the story of the church over the course of that first decade?
Yeah, it's tied a little bit to what Jim was saying. It's like perplexed, confused at the beginning with all those things that were happening. And for me was, I never seen, I didn't know that our church was in trouble until I started seeing everything that was happening. And that was very surprising to me. I thought that was something that usually happens in Latin America, in Guatemala, but not here. So I was very surprised. And then as I started figuring out, why do I take sides? Why do I do? So it was very interesting to see all that development.
I mean, and so I want to move even past that a little bit.
Okay.
Like when you think about the church after all that, like after the merge,
yes.
When you think about the first 10 years of Cornerstone, when you think about Cornerstone, so not the merger, but when you think about Cornerstone, and whether it's the leadership, the people, I know that the becoming a multilingual church is a huge part of that, and I want to talk about it in a second, but I'm just curious as to what stands out to you as you saw the church develop and grow as Cornerstone.
Yeah, to me, it's just the impact around the community. The 3 languages, obviously, but the greater impact that we have as a one church. That was also something new to me. I didn't realize, I couldn't even see or imagine that you could reach so many diverse groups of people in the community. So that was beautiful to see how God brought the people, prepare us, and yeah, and I can't even wait what he's going to be doing in the future.
Yeah. What about you, Maddie?
Yeah, I think it was I would say it was a chaotic time, the beginning, just because you didn't know who knew anybody else. You didn't know, you had some people like, I guess like the Durs who are brand new Cornerstone people, but there's a lot of people you're like, oh, you just assume they're from First Baptist, and there's this like uncertainty. But man, I think about some people from First Baptist that were older, and Jim, you earlier said the church got a lot younger. From my perspective, it got a lot older. So, but I think about, I don't know, I think about people like LaDonna Schneibel, and I think about Patty Whitted. I think about like I think about Jim Thomas a lot, actually. I think there's just like a lot of that season was getting to know people and getting to appreciate their stories and hear them and understand them and laugh with them and learn about them and kind of the process of just investing in people. I mean, as pastors, that's what we do. We invest in people and we love people. And so people come and they go, like Brian was saying, and some of them are sent out at church plants. I think about Danny. I mean, honestly, Danny Nidich came to the church really in that time frame, and now he's one of the pastors at Shalom. And I just think about people, I guess, and I think about I miss people. I miss some of those people I named. I think about Jim Thomas often and miss him a lot. Think about people. So
yeah, it's really interesting.
And harvest festivals. Jeez Louise.
That's right.
Kevin, so I'm sorry for interrupting you, Scotty, but Kevin, I listened to the last one. Kevin bounces, right? And then like Harvest Festival, I take over. We got Awana starting the next week that I'm now the, family ministries pastor. And then Harvest Festival, and like literally the Harvest Festival quote unquote notes was literally like one piece of paper that had a Jumper's King number taped onto it. And like, I was like, I've never been to this. What is this? I have no idea what we're doing. So anyways, I just think about some of those things too. The chaos, that was more my chaos.
That was the chaos. Yeah, exactly.
And we had no green space. Remember the first the first Harvest Festival, I didn't even know where like all the outlets were. And so like we had kids, we had like a double jumper, and then like the circuit breaker broke, and the kid, like, it started collapsing, and it was in the dark. So we used to do this on Sunday nights of Halloween, and it was in the dark. And so you had like 40 kids in this double jumper in the back parking space where there was no green space. It was just like a wall, a cinder block wall. And I had these like floodlights up, and the everything in the circuit breaker broke, and then it started like collapsing, and all the parents were like pulling kids out like it was like the Titanic or something, right? Like it's like sinking, and they're like pulling the kids out. So those are the things that stick with me. Those are they all got out. They all survived.
Good times.
Yeah, good times.
That's right.
I think I slept for 4 days after the first one.
It's interesting because there is to me, I think there was some chaos to it at all over the place, because we were figuring things out, right? We were figuring out how to be a merged church. We were figuring out a lot. I mean, for me, like, that was my 30s, right? And there was a lot of learning, particularly on the front end.
Your kids were little?
Yeah, like kids were super little. It was just, chaotic in a number of different ways. But I think a couple of the things that stand out to me too. One is when you look back over 10 years, you realize just how uniquely transient this area is, and how many people that were core to the story of the church. I mean, we can't list them all because there's like dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of people that were core to the story of the church that were here for a season and moved and are here. And that's just a part of the city. I want to talk about the city in a minute too, but it's striking to consider the unique kind of church we are because of that transient component. One of the other things that I think about during those 10 years is the way in which we kind of had to create vocabulary to describe, and this is where our core values came from. We had to create vocabulary to describe the unique ethos that was this church. Because as a church plant, for a long time, we'd be like, just come hang around for a while. You'll catch it. Right. Like culture and things like that were passed along far more organically. But with a church this size and with the organization came just more kind of an organized component to it that we needed to disseminate and provide a vocabulary for people to describe the distinctives. What made that they're like, man, what, I've never been a part of a church like this before. What is that? Right? What is it that's important and why?
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, please.
One of the things that I've seen over the years is when you start up a church, one of the things you have to really struggle and fight for is a place to meet, a place to be the church. And this kind of changed the order of things.
It did.
Here's a church meeting in a movie theater, and suddenly you got buildings, parking lots. It's like bang, and that just there's no textbook that tells you how to do that.
No.
But what a marvelous gift of God that He was able to put that together and make that work. I think that's huge, and I think about that all the time. How gracious God was to bring us together and make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a story of what we've been entrusted from these previous generations, right? With this facility as a part of that story and as a stewardship. Yeah. So Ara, you came here in the midst of those 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk a little bit in a second about that story, but first, what was your first impression? Like, I want to know, like, what you saw when you showed up.
Do you want really tell you here on mic? Okay,
I do.
So when you kind of merge, you cause chaos, is it right? Like everybody was like confused. But when I came here for first time, I was chaos. I came to a calm, nice church, was chaos completely and confused. And the first thing that stood for me is the languages that you put everywhere, and Farsi languages. Even some of the wording was wrong, but I was just saying, "Wow, this is nice," because
this is the donkey building? That's weird. Don't know what you keep all the donkeys in here.
So it was, for me, it was like always, it was confusing. Was it churches and organizations? Because like we are from Iran and there's lots of things about Iran and people wants to reach that 1040 window. And for example, I went to the organization that completely reaching Iranians, but when I went to the offices, there was nothing, like even the wording or even staff member, like people from South, they are trying to reach. I appreciate that, but it's just, for me, it was confusing. And then even I went to churches, they're saying like we have like 17 nations in these churches with 27 languages in our churches. But for me, one of the things that like even they had like kind of Iranian ministry, but it's just kind of part of the big vision and part of like small part of the church. When I came here and I saw all this wording, I said, oh, this is something different here. And that sign gave me like, okay, I need to check out. Like, if you remember, I said like, I need one room. Don't do anything with me. I don't want to do anything with English churches. So
you did not trust me.
Yeah.
We sat for a long time.
Even though you look kind of Persian.
Man, I'm like, dude, I'm so excited you're here. This is so great. Like, we could do more. And he just looks at me. No.
No. Yeah.
One room, leave me alone.
That's right.
Yeah, I was scared. I said, this guy wants to raise fund and and make the building up. So, but I was very, very sad and confused, and when I realized that is Farsi speaking and Spanish speaking is just same, and Pastor José, like, actually, he was thinking that he's interviewing me, but actually I was interviewing him to see what's happened. And Pastor José really helped me to understand your heart and church heart for
Farsi speaking, not only a small part of what we want to do for unreached group people or Muslim to reach for Christ, but I realize your heart is to be part of this and to be one church. It was just mind-blowing. I don't think so. Like I travel a lot. Like I saw lots of churches and organizations I work. I don't think so in the world there is anything like this. So with very strong, confident, I can say it, and very unique here. And we need to write a book, Scott.
All right, so let's rewind just a little bit and tell a little bit of this story, because I think when you look back on that 10 years, and even 50 years from now, I think one of the most notable things will be the transition from this monolingual church into a multilingual church. And one of the things that's interesting about that was that, like, the Lord did that. That wasn't any of our 10-year plan. That was not a part of the 10-year plan of anyone around the room. Maybe José's. But no, you were applying at other churches.
Yes. It wasn't my plan either.
Like, yeah, I hope that interview goes well.
Yeah.
Not.
José, how would you describe the transition, the way in which the Lord kind of brought us to the place of becoming a multilingual church?
Yeah. Well, everything started with Brian. Brian came and asked me if I wanted to start a Bible study in Spanish, and I did. And then he grew up a little bit, and then Pastor Ara was already here, so God put him here already. So God was planning on this already.
He was?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Wasn't Nueva?
no?
But
Nueva Vida was
Nueva Vida
before
was
Ara.
before. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
This was before Ara.
so I was.
I actually had this. I had this thought when I asked you this question.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're not going to remember.
I'm remembering now.
There was another group, I guess.
There was there was another church.
There was an informal. Oh, you're talking about
There was another church here.
Life Baptist?
Life Baptist.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
were
yeah,
here.
yeah.
Then Nova Vida started.
That was just.
And then you came in.
They were just using
They
the
were just using the
facility, is what
facility.
you
Yes,
mean.
yes.
Gotcha.
But Nueva Vida was First Baptist, right?
No, not at all. Not at all. No, not
Okay,
at all.
see, I'm
I was
Early,
teaching.
early Cornerstone.
I
Early
was
Cornerstone, okay,
teaching the College and Careers group, and then everything got paused. Well, you guys were trying to figure out what's going to happen, and then Brian approached me and asked me, "Hey, would you consider, starting a Bible study in Spanish?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So I was going to seminary at the same time. So we started that. Then you came in. That's right. So Ara came in, and then. So God was bringing the people. God started all this. That's the short question.
It started out. Because it didn't start as a service. It didn't start. We weren't starting.
There was no planning.
And in a sense, honestly, we weren't trying to start a multilingual church or develop to be multilingual.
No.
You were here.
Yeah.
And God built this church for the people that are here. And like, why don't you start a Bible study? There's people in the neighborhood that speak Spanish.
Yeah.
And people started gathering, and it started growing. And it started growing and then I think as it started growing, the way I remember it, it grew to a point where you're like, wait a second, these people though don't understand the Sunday morning service, right? I mean, how far in there do you guys remember how far in there we started actually, didn't we start with Spanish speakers would go out for the sermon and simply do a sermon in Spanish?
Into the
Was that
Welcome
how it
Center.
started? Yeah,
Yes, we will
that's how it started,
celebrate.
right?
We had worship together. We started together, and then we'll go to the Welcome Center.
I mean, it started with the dinners, the Friday night dinners and Bible studies, right?
Right.
The Santa Nueva Vida. And then you have the service element of the sermon, and that was really before there was music or other elements
Right. It was
the
just
service as a whole.
it was just when we had a good number, we decided it was time to start preaching a sermon series,
Mm-hmm.
and we decided to do it together in tandem with you guys in
Yeah,
English.
Well, and I think
For
that was
the
also
sake of unity. Unity became important
It did.
at that point.
And that's where I think it was also interesting, because it was also at that point that you became an elder here, right? Where it wasn't just, oh, I'll just lead this Bible study while I'm in seminary and then go get a job as a pastor, but you became an elder here and weren't able to be supported for the first year at least of that. And we're just sacrificially here to serve and to build and invest into the church. While God was, again, I think just doing something bigger than any of us ever, like we could see like an inch in front of our face and we're like, oh, I guess that next thing makes sense. Okay. I guess that next thing makes sense. Okay. But he was developing us into, he had a much more fundamental shift in the works.
Yeah. You had Pastor Steve Campbell was there serving with you, and then Nestor Otazu as well. And so you had kind of this leadership team that was developed, and they've since gotten a little bit older and have transitioned out of serving with Cornerstone Espanol. But it's sort of this fascinating transition time of bringing you on to the church as an elder, facilitating that ministry to people who needed to hear the gospel and who you were ministering to, and so many people were coming to faith, and you had people who were evangelizing and baptisms, and it was just a beautiful picture of God bringing the church together in a very beautiful way.
Yeah, God definitely did all of this. I mean, just to show you that it was Him, and I was seeing myself as a pastor, probably of an English-speaking congregation with mixed people, right? That's what I was candidating for one time, and also I had taught the college and careers group. So me being Hispanic, which the natural thing will be to teach English, a Spanish-speaking congregation, but it never occurred to me because that's what I've been doing, and even the college and careers group, it was Pastor Steve who was influential on that. After it was Will Bradbury before, because there was no Hispanics coming here. So,
I love that phrase. It never occurred to me. Yeah. Because I think that so many, when I think about those 10 years, and I think about the most significant, most amazing developments in the life of the church, I don't just think like, oh, that I wasn't trying to do that. I was like, it never even occurred to me.
And I think then the cool thing about it never occurring to us, especially never occurring to Jose, is, and this is just true of all of us, we would ruin it. Because it'd be like, oh, I've got this idea. And then, because what may have happened is maybe you try to siphon off and start your own church. Because that's usually a ministry will develop. If a ministry turns into a church, it turns into its own thing, as opposed to you are a part of how you're going to change a church that already exists and then become multilingual. And like you said, we never get there on our own. So,
and by that, I don't mean that we, don't have any like vision or ideas or things like that. But I do
that's
think
what I heard.
But I do think that there's a way in which God builds His church, and always we've been in a sense reactive to what He's doing, responsive to what He's doing, as opposed to determining it ourselves.
Another small fact is that typically West LA, this area where we live, there's not that many Hispanics, and when I started, it's like, okay, I'll start, but where are they? And then little by little, I started noticing the lovely, beautiful Oaxacan people who lived here. So we started meeting and start coming, but it's that was very surprising as well.
Yeah, and I think connected to that is not just, and by the way, it never occurred to me was what Karen said to Jim when he proposed, actually. Ironically enough. But at the same time, I think the church as a whole, not just across English and Spanish lines, not just amongst, American born and Oaxacan or people who are Hispanic, I think there was like a desire to see the church reflect our city and all of its diversity, ethnically, socioeconomically, as much as possible. So there was a move simultaneously, I think, amongst the church as a desire to see the body of Christ reflected, every tribe, tongue, people, nation reflected in the life of the church, that the ministry to Hispanics in West LA was just a natural outflowing of that wasn't a plan or set aside ahead of time, but that God was just doing in the hearts of people here, and that's what made it so exciting for me.
And I don't think Ara came until after we even had a Spanish service up and running. I think the Spanish service was already up and running.
I think there was a sense of Ara just because as he heads towards you, there's like a wave of Ara. Yeah, some sort of, you could sense that something big was coming.
I mean, because in one sense, it's one thing to become a bilingual church. It's another one to be a church family with 3 different languages. I mean, how did that develop, Ara?
It was not easy. Like even to meet this church, like all my life was a church planting, and I've been in the classes, and I wanna like say my heart and other churches' heart. I don't want to bring it down. Like the churches, they have heart for reaching unreached group or Hispanic, or they have like, but I find Cornerstone has like, if we want to say, I don't know, Matt, is it right or not? But like, I find Cornerstone is tier 1 kind of. And I really, without any like, and also like in church planting, I met with lots of people that they said, your church planting depends on what connection you have with people. And I had lots of connection with big people, but never happened to me to be able to full-time pastor or focus on my ministry more. After 20 years, Cornerstone is the first time that I'm full-time in ministry. And there was a God, like really, without knowing anybody, just one email, and you guys was already God was preparing you for something like that. I believe like even before Pastor José started pastoring Hispanic group and family members, God was preparing other English speakers, like other people that they know a little bit Spanish, to prepare the group to have Pastor José to come. And I think God was already doing something. Like I wanna mention that I didn't do anything here. I just being what you says, be part of what God is already doing. Yeah. And I just want to say thank you for your faithfulness and how God used you, and you were reflecting, Pastor Matt says, this is one of good things that you said today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Reflecting the culture and reflecting the people, and this is like amazing. What was your question, Pastor?
That's all right.
but there was a small group before you came, Ara. There was a small group of Farsi speakers who were a part of the church, and we weren't really sure how to shepherd them well. And there were some leadership issues and a variety of things that came up with that. But those were just people who happened to come to the church because this is Terangelis, right? Like so you have like a natural inflow. God's bringing people into the church, and then we're like, oh yeah, we need people who can shepherd well in a way that is culturally appropriate for these people, linguistically appropriate for these people. And God brought you in at this amazing time, so it was pretty amazing.
And I want to mention, like, this is what God is doing. Like, you didn't have like I really, really appreciate what you're saying. Like we have a vision, we have things to do, and we have hope to do something. But it was not in radar of the church to do something like this. This is how God is doing, and I felt it every step. And God kind of healed me in the process of becoming pastor, and all that bad thing stuff came out of me because I was planting church for 20 years kind of alone. Yeah. So there's lots of things in my heart and my shoulders. And when I find out that, I can share this without a pastor judge me, and I can freely talk about my problems, my sins, my struggles, that gave me, that's why I'm saying tier 1, because I couldn't say my sins or my struggles to other pastors, because it was no pastors or even organization that I had to say, yes to everything that they say and jump from hoops and other stuff. So I really appreciate that. And it was God things.
Yeah.
I just want to add something that Matt said, connected to what you said, Matt. Even before Pastor Ara came here to be present here at the church, I remember there was this Iranian lady who was going around the neighborhood and bringing. That's what made me remember bringing Iranians here to the church that we didn't know what to do with them. And then after a while, she left, and some of them stay here. And then that started the question. Well, we have these Iranians here. We don't have someone. We need somebody. And then Ara came in, and I remember having these conversations with all of us. And they said, could it be that he might be the one? And so it was very interesting to see how God started bringing and sending like previews of what he wanted to do to us.
I mean, the timing was unreal, because when you talk about the Lord working, like you say like, oh, like we might need this. There were 4 Iranians baptized on a Sunday, and on Monday I got the email from Jamie and Ara. Like, I mean, it was like, so sometimes the Lord does just like put things in front of your face and be like,
we were sitting there. We were like, what are you saying, God? We're not sure. It's unclear.
So, but Brian, I would love to ask you what you think, and I think this is probably too big of a question to get our arms all the way around it, but what do you think it was about our theology, our philosophy, what the Lord had nurtured in our midst that created a fertile soil for this kind of development?
I mean, this is how we've always done things. At some level, you and I at least, practiced this together for a long time when it was hard. Like it was. I remember I tell this story sometimes when I talk to other pastors about how God builds His church. These kind of phrases we use. I talk about Matt, where like he comes in, he's 18, and he's like, I want to work with homeless people in West LA or in Westwood. And I'm like, well, I know a lot of them, they're going to chew you up and spit you out. And then thinking in my head, maybe we should just lead like a Bible study or something. Like he's like, like, can you kind of do my thing, the thing that I think is going to work? But our stupid philosophy of ministry, and it's like, no, we got to like let him try, and then I'm waiting for him to fail so he can do my thing that I know is going to work. And then there's like 2 homeless Bible studies in Westwood that last for years. And we have relationships with these people. And I think that there's just ways that we learned that pastoral ministry, at least in terms of like organization and vision, is mainly being a first responder and not architecting things yourself, but being willing and ready to kind of go where God leads and to be active in that process and make sure that you're facilitating it, but you're also not getting in the way of it with your own ideas. So we're always kind of trying to come alongside and be humble as best we can. And we fail at that a lot, but I think that's what made this work. Because when you get, at some point, you ask what the notable things for 10 years. And I think now that I've reflected a little bit, the most notable thing is how hard it is to explain to other people. Because I keep having to say, oh, you guys merged. Like, okay, yes, but not the way you think. It wasn't an acquisition. Like, it wasn't like they were dying and we were young, so we kind of came in and took over. It really was a merge. And they'll say, oh, you're multilingual. And like, okay, but not what you think though. like José and R are actually, they're pastors like I'm a pastor. And you're like, and we're one church. We're trying to, be unified in this in a real way that's not just like a ministry over in the corner. And I think that A, that's just really notable. But B, it's that mentality that allows you to be open to things like this and let God lead where He's going. So there's more theologically we get into there, but I think it's just really having practiced it and having seen it work for so long and going, well, if that's the kind of church we are, then you stop being surprised as much when things that feel like, oh, that's where we got this email from Jamie. Should I ignore this? You're much more prone to go like, no, I should probably answer this. Yeah. Because you just have, you've seen enough times how this stuff works.
Yeah. Man, that's one of the things that stands out to me as I look back over now even 20 years. When I think about the whole thing, it's the Lord directing and the joy that comes from not trying to take credit or make what we want happen, but to that responsiveness to the things that he's doing that are, I mean, the very first Sunday of Shoreline, you preached from Ephesians about him doing more than we could ever ask or imagine. And I think you repreached it after the merge. Did you? Or was that just in the Ephesians?
I think you did, or maybe you did on the anniversary when you used the weird audio cuts.
I did. That's right. I did.
My first sermon.
Did. That's right.
Thank you, by the way, for
see,
that.
When people can't remember which of all of us preached something, that's because we can't even remember.
That's correct.
But it is. I mean, it's an answer to that prayer, and that's where I think that the confession that it didn't occur to me isn't a result of just kind of lackadaisical, like not caring. It's an admittance of the glory of God and the working that he does that's beyond all that we could ask or imagine in the life of the church and in the life of, and not that it's not hard. Like it's also been difficult over the last 10 years. It's been difficult interpersonally in this room. I mean, like this doesn't, it sounds great, but
Yeah, do you want to talk about some of this stuff?
so I've got a list here.
Yeah.
I would like to.
An airing of grievances?
An airing of grievances, that's right. But we've all had to work through different things, even to work together. But the Lord has proven so much greater than any of that, and using one another as a sanctifying work along the way. Where are we at? Where are we at time-wise? So, okay, I want to, one of the other things that we talked about is a little bit of I want to change gears a little bit. One of the things we've talked about in the Cornerstone History podcast is both the history of the church, but also the church in its place in the city. And Jim, maybe Brian, I'd love for you guys to comment on how over the last 15 years, since 2011, how you've seen the city develop and how that impacts the presence of the church kind of in this space, in this generation. I know it's a huge question, but I maybe just some observations about how you've seen the city develop and our presence here in it.
Well, I might actually back that up a little bit. I think part of the issue for me is the lens that God gives me to look through. So I think before the merge, just generationally, we were looking at an older church, many people dealing with those kinds of issues and people who had lived here for decades. And that was the lens through which I looked. Well, what are your issues and what are the problems that you deal with? How do you evangelize when you're in your 70s and all the houses around you are being bought by people in their 20s and you don't have anything in common with them, and so you just go inside and watch Ed Sullivan show or something, Is he still on? I think he is. Anyway. And then the church changes, you've got people in their 20s and it's a different lens. So I think I have to say that sense of God giving me a way to look at the community kind of through what our congregation is was both I think good and it had some really very difficult features because there are a lot of people I missed. So I don't know, that's my first thought. Brian, help me here.
I mean, it is a big question. How has the city changed and how does that adjust, our posture? And some of it is the things that I think were relatively normal in Los Angeles have only increased, at least in West LA. So the transiency has gone up over the last 10 years. That's even before the pandemic. I think there's a normal transiency and that was increasing. The expense of living here goes up and that increases the transiency. And so that's going to change in some ways the demographics of where we are and who lives here and why and how long. That's going to, of course, change the way we have to kind of figure things out. Some churches, I actually was talking to a pastor who was saying, it can be hard to make really any kind of change, when your church is, got all these people and they've been around for 20, 30, 40 years. And I was just like, I don't have any idea what that's like. We had to figure out how to get people caught up to speed when they're only here for 3 or 4 years, at least a lot of them. And some stay longer out of commitment to the city or for other reasons. It's phenomenal. But that's going to change our posture kind of in the city as that increases. We're going to have to make sure that we're training and sending out. And I think a lot of the other things that probably ramped up in the middle of the last decade are affecting us too in the city. I think there's obviously more fragmentation, more division. There's less even pop cultural consensus, as to what everyone listens to, watches, thinks about. There's less you can bond over with another human being based on any kind of commonality because of the diversity, not ethnically necessarily or even socioeconomically, but just kind of culturally in that kind of subcultural sense across the city. And so how to demonstrate and fight for unity in Christ with people who are showing up without a sense of that from another part of the country, maybe, whether Christian or not, to be a part of something. So you're trying to really train people up quickly to participate in that, maybe before they leave. And then there's some of us who are going to stick around and be trying to do that long term. And so I think the city so there's lots of changes simultaneously. There's nothing new under the sun. We're human beings who are fighting for our own kind of ways and, selfish desires. And we need the grace of God to humble us and draw us together and make us whole and reorder our loves and love Him and love each other. And so there's a lot of things that haven't changed, which is important to note, but the way that expresses itself is going to manifest itself uniquely in some of those changes. And so we want to be aware of that too.
That's such a helpful and fascinating note, because I think we, in one sense, we are experiencing in this generation something the church has never faced in West LA. The West LA is unlike it's ever been before, and it's changing more rapidly than ever before. And the church is within that context and reaching into that context and is here to reach people in that context. At the same time, when you look back over the last 100+ years, we're also just doing what every other generation did on this corner, right? We're meeting with the God of the universe, who hasn't changed, and existing and striving to be faithful in our generation in this space. And I think that both gives us a diligence to be engaged in the city as it is, not just as we wish it was or as it used to be, but be engaged with the city as it is, but also with a great confidence that our God is bigger than all of that and has called us here in this place, in this moment, on purpose. And so when I think about the history, and I look back on the history of the church here, it's humbling and exciting that the Lord has called us here in this moment for this purpose and develop the church the way He's developed it, to meet and reach this city in this generation. And we get to be a part of that.
Yeah, and what is also amazing, as you were saying, and also what Brian was saying, is that when we started here, God started working in the unification of 3 different cultures, right? The world out there was more together, more intact, but now there's a reversal. We are now here in the church more united in Christ. The three different families are more united, and the world out there, as you were saying, they're more fragmented. So it's like God knew what was needed for the community, and perhaps this unity that God is displaying here amongst the 3 families, it's a strong witness of His light for this community, that you can be fragmented. But I'm
still
here.
unified. Yeah. It occurs to me that's something. The model there is not necessarily the way it looks to us right now, but the readiness to look for what the next model of this society around us is going to be, and how God is inviting us to enter into that, or invite that culture into our fellowship in some new way. And that's, I think, both the exciting thing and the scary thing.
All right, one last just kind of observation. Maybe Matt, I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about how you see this dynamic? Because I think as we started that decade, we were a merging church, right? A lot of the stories we look at the beginning of that decade, it was all about the dynamics in the merge. The middle of that decade was all about the development of us into a multilingual church. I think there were a lot of other things going on, but there was the thing that stands out probably most prominently. And as we came to the end of that decade, I think there was beyond just being a multilingual church, we were increasingly becoming a multiplying church, and ended that decade with our first church plant. Have since had a second church plant. Matt, as you think about the way in which God has built us into a multiplying church towards the end of that decade, how do you think that fits into this story, and why? How do we see that? How does that fit into this story, and how does that fit into what he's doing here through us and in the city?
I think the story of Christianity is the story of multiplication. It's the story of Christ investing in his disciples who went out and preached the gospel. And as the gospel was preached and people came to faith in him, churches were started, and those churches sent out people to spread the gospel. And then when people came to faith, churches were started, and so on and so forth. And we are really just at the end of a long chain of multiplication. So I think what it means to be a church that's alive, thriving in the gospel, is especially maybe even particularly in our context that we've got a lot of young people coming in and people going out and all these other things that happen, is to be a church that raises up leaders and sends them out, raises up leaders and sends them out. And we've got a lot of incredible godly men and women here at the church, and a lot of incredible godly men and women that we would love to raise up and send out and multiply all corners of this city, which is a massive city that is very localized in a lot of ways. There's no way for us to, if we had this sort of vision, you could come in and you could imagine a church planner coming into Los Angeles and saying, I want to reach Los Angeles. And it's like, well, yeah, there's 10 million people plus, and there's no way to reach Los Angeles like with just one local church. This is when you think about Los Angeles, there are a lot of churches, and there's particularly a lot of neighborhoods in a lot of churches, but there are far more people. That we are a far under-churched city in so many ways because of the massive amount of people here. And so the reality is we see us as a stable organization that has been here for over 100 years, 120 years. We see us being a launching pad for so many churches and so many ministries for the next 100 years. We want to be a part of sending out dozens and dozens of church plants and missionaries and people who maybe are just really faithful servant ministers in other church contexts who want to see the gospel spreading and multiplying because it has grown up in them and grows out from them, as we see in Colossians. And so I think it's a beautiful picture of what our vision is. Our goal as a group of pastors is not to make Cornerstone West LA into some massive, ginormous church that is, the one church that people drive, 3 hours away to see, Brian preach on Descartes or whatever, I think it's really what we want to see, what we would love to see. Is that okay? Did you think it was funny? No? Brian did not think it was funny, just for the record. He didn't think that was funny either. But the point is, we're not trying to build up Cornerstone West LA. We're trying to invest in the people that God brings us and send them out to what God has for them. And we believe part of what that means is multiplying churches all over the city. I would love a network of 50 Cornerstone churches, some of which are called Shalom or other things like that. But 50 churches that were sent out from Cornerstone West LA or sent out from sister churches, and just godly men and women investing and loving their local community, because that's how LA is. It's localized in that way, and it needs hundreds of local churches to reach people.
Absolutely. All right, Jim, I think we have to give you the last word. We've spent the last few months recounting a 120-year history. and generations after generation after generation of people that have worshiped here and reached this city and have worshiped in this place. You spent a lot more time than just these podcasts thinking about this and researching and reading. And what are the impressions that you're left with as you look back over the last 120-year history of Cornerstone?
Of course, I haven't been here that long, you understand.
A long time you've been here, Jim. Not 120 years, but a long time.
You've done the research. You were more familiar with what happened before you than anybody.
The thing I see, which is fascinating to me, you look at what was here in 1901 and compare it to what is here now. It is like, you're on another planet. And through that, God has led the church through crisis after crisis. And those crises have been God's instrument, as much as they looked to the people, the congregation, like, something horrible. It's been God's instrument to change the church to what he wants it to be. And you can just see it when you look back on the whole pattern. And I think that every once in a while you see someone who is looking for God's changes and going with those, and it moves the church in a different direction. We need to be people who are looking for God's hand upon, I think, our community, our opportunity. As we sit here and talk in the microphones, we're not talking to necessarily a neighbor across the street. We're talking to you who are in some other state or city or country, perhaps, as you're listening to this right now. And the issue is, how is God moving that? How's God moving you to do there something that has come out of what he's done here? So I think that the exciting thing to me is to say, all right, now we spread farther than geography. We spread as far as electricity and words go on a line. And
Guam, as far as Guam.
Yes, at least, if not beyond. And then but it's the character of God that doesn't make church look like what we want it to look like, but makes it look like something extraordinary, wild, crazy, not routine, and some new way, and moves in that direction. Some of those fail, some of them succeed. It's not always your fault. It may be the fault of all kinds of things, but God has you there to learn and grow and do it again. That for me is the exciting part. This creates that, hopefully. And the next stage, I think, is up to you who are listening to this podcast right now to take this, pray about it, and look for teammates and move ahead to see how God will use you in your time.
Amen. Well, thanks, Jim. Thanks for that encouragement. Thanks for all the research that you've done, and for the faithfulness in the way that this story has brought to light God's glory in such a unique way. And thank you all for listening. Thanks for being a part of this story, in whether you were a part of it previously and are now somewhere else listening, or whether you're a part of the story God is writing here, now, in this moment, in this generation. We're a part of not just a family, but a story. It's existed long before we ever showed up here. And we get to discover what he has for us, for the church, and for the city in this generation. So thanks for being a part of this. Thanks for loving God and seeking him. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you on Sunday.